Well, 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 the worm has turned.
Who's saying that she's an economist?
Well, I'm an economist. I studied economics. I got a master's in economics from the London School of Economics, and I worked as an economist at the Bank of England.
That's what he chooses to do. That's the way he chooses to spend his life, watching animals suffer. And we don't even need to worry about the climate anymore because this goddamn chamber has offset more carbon emissions by not heating this goddamn place than anything else.
What transpired in a matter of minutes has left the Labour Party reeling. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, long regarded as Sir Keir Starmer's most dependable ally, did the unthinkable, live, and before the eyes of the nation. It began with an astonishing moment of political theatre. During a high-stakes interview, Starmer was asked a blunt question: who is responsible for the £57 billion hole in the budget? The lights in the studio held steady, but something far more critical gave way: Labour's facade of unity. Did you know that over 95% of our viewers aren't subscribed to the channel? We totally get it, life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy to forget. But here's the thing, subscribing is completely free, and it really helps us keep creating the content you enjoy. So, why not hit that subscribe button and join our community? It only takes a second, but it makes a world of difference to us. Thank you for your support. Without hesitation, and in a tone that could chill steel, Starmer replied, "That's a question for the Chancellor." The pause that followed was deafening. Reeves's expression spoke volumes. There had been no prior warning, no coordinated briefing, just a cold, calculated abandonment. For a woman who had spent years loyally defending every manifesto pledge, every fiscal commitment, and every strategic misstep, the humiliation was stark. Under the glare of live cameras and the scrutiny of a nationwide audience, she had been unceremoniously cast aside. Starmer, arms folded, reclined slightly, as if to distance himself from the economic crisis engulfing his party. This was not politics as usual. It was deeply personal. The very man who once hailed Reeves as the economic cornerstone of Labour's vision had now deemed her expendable. And, in doing so, he made clear that the blame for the UK's spiralling financial predicament would not rest on his shoulders. It would fall squarely on hers. But what Starmer, and indeed, many in Labour's inner circle, did not anticipate was that Reeves had finally reached her breaking point. For months, insiders say she had bitten her tongue, watching her economic strategies undermined, her warnings dismissed, and her policy proposals overridden, all in favour of grandstanding abroad and hollow domestic pledges designed to court fleeting headlines. The £57 billion deficit, Reeves had long argued privately, was no accident. It was the direct consequence of reckless financial commitments, lavish defence deals, performative climate promises, and international pledges with no credible economic return. She had cautioned repeatedly that such spending was unsustainable, but Starmer, seemingly preoccupied with projecting an image of global statesmanship, ignored her advice. And then came the moment. For the first time, Reeves refused to toe the line. Her response was sharp, unwavering, and unmistakably laced with fury. "Let's not pretend I wrote these budgets alone," she said, her voice calm but seething. "Every spending decision was signed off by the Prime Minister. Every single one." The room fell silent. Starmer, visibly rattled, attempted to interject, but Reeves pressed on. "You don't get to vanish when things go wrong, and take the credit when they go right. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." Within minutes, her remarks had spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines erupted. Labour HQ was thrown into chaos. This was no minor slip-up, it was an all-out political rupture. The Chancellor had publicly broken ranks with the party leader amid an economic firestorm. Gone was the image of a party unified around fiscal discipline and competence. In its place, a bitter, public schism. Labour's economic credibility, meticulously crafted over months, was collapsing before the nation's eyes. And Reeves wasn't finished. In plain English, it was a cover-up. Ministers were reportedly instructed to stay on message, deflect direct questions, and present the crisis as a lingering consequence of previous Conservative mismanagement. But the narrative failed to hold. This was not about the Tories. This was about a Labour government in office, making decisions, raising taxes, and yet, still losing control of the economy. Public confidence nosedived. The financial markets reacted sharply. For the second time in less than a year, the pound plummeted in the wake of Labour's very public economic fracture. Investors backed off. Mortgage rates edged higher. Businesses braced for renewed instability. And while all this unfolded, the Prime Minister maintained the illusion of normalcy. Rachel Reeves, however, was far from finished. According to well-placed sources, she confronted Starmer directly the next morning in what was meant to be a routine debrief. Instead, it erupted into a full-scale row. Witnesses claim Reeves accused the Prime Minister's team of orchestrating her political downfall, saying bluntly, "You wanted a puppet, not a chancellor. But I will not take the blame for your mess." Starmer reportedly sat in silence as Reeves delivered a searing indictment of his leadership, citing backroom maneuvering, media manipulation, and the deliberate concealment of economic data that had, she claimed, signaled a looming crisis long before it became public. One insider described her remarks not as a rebellion, but an act of political survival. She knew the knives were out, the source said, and she made it clear she wouldn't go quietly. Speculation over a possible resignation spread rapidly. While Reeves publicly denied any plans to quit, the damage was done. The public had witnessed the fracture. The media had recorded it. And Labour's veneer of unity was irreparably shattered. For ordinary people already facing surging food prices, soaring energy bills, and growing job insecurity, the sight of party leaders turning on each other on live television felt like betrayal. And at the center of it all stood a woman who, by multiple accounts, had sounded alarm after alarm, only to be dismissed, marginalized, and finally scapegoated. The question now on many lips, how much longer can Sir Keir Starmer survive, when even his most senior lieutenant has broken ranks? As the dust settled from Reeves's on-air defiance and her private confrontation with the Prime Minister, the damage began to spread throughout Labour's wider infrastructure. What began as an embarrassing rift between the party leader and the Chancellor had spiralled into a full-blown crisis, eroding trust in Parliament, alienating sections of Labour's voter base, and shaking confidence in Britain's already fragile economy. Infighting broke out behind closed doors. Ministers were at odds. Advisers reportedly purged their message logs. Regional leaders rebelled, rejecting central party directives. Labour's carefully maintained image, one of steady hands, fiscal responsibility, and calm governance, was suddenly exposed as theatrical illusion. And at the centre of this unravelling stood the man who had risen to power by promising to banish chaos from British politics, Keir Starmer. Yet chaos is exactly what he has presided over. Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves had become the unexpected symbol of the party's implosion. What many first perceived as an emotional outburst was, in fact, the culmination of months, perhaps years, of mounting frustration. Insiders now claim Reeves had consistently warned Starmer that the party's fiscal trajectory was unsustainable. She had voiced skepticism over rushed climate deals that were more about optics than substance. She had challenged the government's decision to mirror NATO pledges without a rigorous audit. She had opposed the creation of multiple new quangos, which drained funds without delivering clear benefits. Each time, her warnings were overruled. Now, in the wake of her very public break from the leadership, she was no longer just the numbers-focused technocrat behind the scenes. She was a symbol of power misused, trust broken, and a party locked in bitter internal conflict. But beneath the political drama lay brutal economic realities that Labour could no longer spin away. The £57 billion black hole wasn't theoretical. It was real, immediate, and devastating. Just weeks before the crisis erupted, the Office for Budget Responsibility had issued a warning. But its findings were buried beneath media fanfare surrounding Starmer's much-hyped international tour. Whistleblowers have since revealed internal Treasury documents showing a staggering 18% rise in daily operational spending over just 9 months, growth that far outpaced government revenue. Labour had overpromised on NHS funding, underdelivered on tax reform, and quietly borrowed to plug the gaps, without a word to the public. Reeves had been the face of those announcements. Her name was on the statements, her face on the interviews. But the spending directives, the photo ops, the foreign press tours, the eco-friendly economic stunts, came from Starmer and his circle of unelected advisers. According to aides, Reeves later confided that the greatest betrayal wasn't simply being blamed, it was being silenced. Her calls to freeze non-essential public hiring were ignored. Her proposed spending caps on new green initiatives were dismissed as unstrategic by Starmer's foreign policy aides. Each objection she raised was quietly shelved, each proposal diluted. Now, she has refused to carry the burden alone. And as the Labour Party reels from its most severe internal rupture in over a decade, the political future of both Starmer and Reeves hangs precariously in the balance. Even her request to meet privately with officials at the Bank of England was intercepted and overruled by the Prime Minister's office. What followed was not damage control, it was a media reckoning. Programmes across the spectrum, BBC's Newsnight, ITV's Peston, Sky News, began asking the questions Labour had dodged for months. Where had the money gone? Why had there been no fiscal safeguards? And why, after months of lofty rhetoric about rebuilding Britain's future, was there now a £57 billion black hole where economic stability was supposed to be? But the most damning exposé did not come from a political commentator. It came from a data journalist at the Financial Times, who traced the vast majority of the new spending to 4 major initiatives, each authorised with minimal or no parliamentary scrutiny. The first was the International Green Technology Initiative, a flagship policy designed to revolutionise Britain's global green footprint. Keir Starmer had proudly announced the programme during a joint summit with the Canadian Prime Minister, calling it the future of global innovation. What he failed to mention was that £11.3 billion had been funnelled into the initiative before a single infrastructure blueprint was finalised. There were no oversight mechanisms, no enforceable benchmarks, just lucrative contracts handed to private firms, many with well-documented ties to Labour donors. The second was the expanded Defence Solidarity Budget, a rapid-fire response to rising global tensions and growing concerns over NATO's cohesion. While national security is paramount, Rachel Reeves had initially proposed a phased investment plan to ensure accountability. Starmer overruled her, fast-tracking over £14 billion in defence spending, eager to bolster his standing in meetings with Washington and Brussels. The spending generated headlines, but the deployment remained months behind schedule, delivering political optics but little tangible security. The third hole was the Global Equality Fund, a sprawling social justice initiative launched with much fanfare in Berlin. It was framed as Labour's moral vision on the international stage. But only a small portion of its £9.7 billion allocation appears in official government expenditure reports. The rest, according to Treasury officials, remains under audit, its destinations and recipients unclear. And then there was the fourth, perhaps most explosive revelation, the Prime Minister's Innovation Investment Plan. Ostensibly created to support Britain's small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, whistleblowers revealed that over 70% of grants were awarded to startups linked to venture capital firms already aligned with Labour's Economic Advisory Group. Questions of conflict of interest, cronyism, and even corruption emerged. The public, already reeling from the broader crisis, was no longer willing to accept vague assurances. Still, Starmer avoided accountability. When pressed in a live radio interview on whether he had personally authorized the spending decisions now at the heart of the crisis, he gave a textbook evasive reply, "We make decisions as a team." But Rachel Reeves had already clarified that she was not part of that team. She had merely been the one required to face the press, to justify decisions she did not make, and to front policies she did not author. The backlash from Labour's base was immediate and incandescent. Party forums exploded with outrage. Trade union leaders spoke out, furious at what they saw as a betrayal of working-class trust. Previously loyal backbenchers began calling for an internal inquiry. And in Labour's historical strongholds, councils once considered electorally unshakable, local leaders began hearing the same refrain, "We didn't vote for this." For a working class battered by inflation, spiralling rents, and deepening job insecurity, Labour had promised fairness, competence, and integrity. Instead, they received scandal, blame-shifting, and political spin. The polls reflected the fury. Within a week of the Reeves-Starmer implosion, Labour's national approval rating dropped by 6 points. Focus groups revealed growing disillusionment not only with Labour's economic plan, but with its moral compass. One retired nurse from Yorkshire summed up the mood, they promised grown-up politics. This is just more games. And we're the ones paying for it. And that's the essence of the crisis. Behind every billion squandered, behind each broken promise, real people, families forced to choose between heating and food, small businesses pushed to the brink, pensioners watching the value of their savings erode by the day. This is not just politics, it's survival. And while Keir Starmer retreats behind platitudes and tightly stage-managed interviews, it is now evident that the British public want something he appears unable, or unwilling, to give: the truth. Rachel Reeves may have been pushed into the fire. But by stepping out and speaking up, she has ignited a much deeper force, a reckoning that neither Starmer nor Labour's inner circle can contain. The question is no longer whether there will be consequences. It is how far the collapse will go. The final days of political illusion always look the same: panicked headlines, desperate appeals for unity, and carefully worded speeches meant to soothe rather than explain. But for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the illusion did not simply erode, it shattered. In the smouldering aftermath of the £57 billion disaster, the Labour Party now faces a full-scale revolt, not only from within its own ranks, but from the very people it pledged to serve. Rachel Reeves, once dismissed by some as a technocratic footnote in Starmer's larger political project, has become something else entirely: a martyr with a microphone. And when martyrs speak, people listen. In a defiant string of interviews in the days that followed the political firestorm, Rachel Reeves abandoned the cautious tones of her past. She didn't mince her words. She described a government, drunk on its own image, addicted to foreign praise while deaf to the anguish at home. In her telling, the Prime Minister had become consumed by optics, surrounding himself with American consultants and European PR strategists, while systematically shutting out the working-class voices Labour was once created to represent. Her voice, once deliberate and restrained, now carried something entirely new: fire. And with every cutting phrase, she chipped away at the glossy, manufactured image Keir Starmer had built. But it was not just reputational damage that now plagued the government, it was institutional rot. The Treasury, gutted and disoriented, was the epicenter of the implosion. Internal audits were quietly launched. Several senior civil servants resigned in silence, while others began leaking damning documents to the press. One particularly devastating report from a financial oversight watchdog revealed that parts of Starmer's administration had failed to file any expenditure justifications for over 4 months. Billions spent with no oversight, no audits, no scrutiny, just unchecked disbursement masquerading as strategic reform. Parliament descended into chaos. The Conservatives, ever opportunistic, seized the moment with surgical precision, branding Labour as reckless socialists in neoliberal suits. Reform UK went further, casting both Labour and the Tories as equally corrupt relics of a broken system. Inside Labour itself, the pressure cooker exploded. Long-standing backbenchers began to break ranks. Some called for Starmer's resignation outright. A few even floated the unthinkable, that Rachel Reeves, whose downfall had ignited the scandal, might now become his replacement. The irony was stark. The same man who had vowed to end the chaos of Conservative misrule had now presided over the largest fiscal scandal in modern political memory. The leader who promised grown-up politics had treated the nation's economy like a stage-managed press event. And the party that swore to prioritize working families had funneled billions to international partners, elite consultancies, and corporate middlemen, leaving the British public behind. Even as the revelations mounted, Starmer refused to apologize. His public statements were laced with deflection, vague acknowledgements of lessons to be learned, and familiar calls for unity going forward. His inner circle circled the wagons, blaming the media, blaming miscommunication, blaming anyone but themselves. But the people had stopped listening. Because they had already heard everything they needed to in that one defining moment, when Rachel Reeves, live on national television, looked the Prime Minister in the eye and refused to lie for him. That moment, unscripted, unsanitized, and painfully human, did what months of opposition attacks could not. It shattered the illusion. It revealed a truth Labour's leadership could no longer contain, that the party was fractured, its economic credibility in ruins, its promises empty. And that even its most loyal figures could no longer pretend the emperor was wearing clothes. The media frenzy subsided. The headlines moved on. But the damage lingered. Across the nation, Labour MPs returned to their constituencies only to be met with fury. Constituency meetings turned into battlegrounds. Shouting matches erupted where once there was quiet loyalty. Lifelong Labour voters, those who had clung to hope through austerity, Brexit, and Boris, now openly declared their disgust. One former Labour council leader in Liverpool summed up the mood in brutal terms: "If this is Starmer's Britain, I'd rather take my chances with chaos. At least chaos doesn't pretend it's principled." And so the great unravelling continues. Rachel Reeves may yet survive politically. She may even return, scarred but strengthened, a living warning to those who choose loyalty to image over loyalty to truth. But Keir Starmer? His fate is already being sealed, not by his enemies, but by the very machine he once commanded. His party. His cabinet. His country. They are no longer convinced. The moment he chose image over honesty, power over principle, he didn't merely lose public support, he lost the moral authority to lead. Because leadership is not about immaculate press releases or high-profile summits. It's about responsibility. It's about facing the music when things fall apart. And above all, it's about having the courage to admit when you have failed the people who entrusted you with power. Keir Starmer failed. Spectacularly. And now, there is no hiding place left. This was not just a £57 billion mistake. It was a betrayal. And the people of Britain, angry, betrayed, and unfooled, will not forget. Thank you.